Hello, and welcome to Practical Ideas for Growth. I am Sarah Doback, and today I am joined by my good friend and colleague, Mitch Reno. Welcome, Mitch.
Hey, great to be here, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to hear. I'm even more excited to talk about client experience today. It's such I think, a gray area for a lot of firms. And that seems like an odd thing to say, other than like a lot of people talk about client experience, and I'm not sure anybody knows how to define it or what it really means. Many firms think of client experience as like, oh, yeah, our clients, we provide good service. Well, what does service really mean, and how do clients measure that? And there's this whole gray area that gets a little vague when you actually start asking questions. And so I'm excited that you're here to talk to us about that and share some of your expertise around this.
Well, thank you, and let's try to make it less gray and less opaque, and make it a little clearer to some of the folks who are listening.
Absolutely. And, I for some of our firms listening, I'm not sure that they realize that there's actually CX roles in firms, and you hold one of those. You were one of the ceiling breakers, and not probably the first. There was a whole bunch of you that kind of navigated this, but you've been very vocal. So can you tell people a little bit about like what your role is at your firm, and add a little clarity so they understand some context for our conversation today?
Well, I've been at Raymond for over 22 years now, and I started on the marketing side of the practice, and spent probably 15 years as the chief marketing and sales officer. So oversee the growth from about 27 million up to about 135 million in revenue. We'll probably this year now be about a $200 million firm. But my role really in the client experience phase of that really started accidentally, because we just became such a client-centric organization that more and more of my work was focused on how do we build a better client experience. And to the point where one day I sort of looked up the words client experience in my friend Google's dictionary.
Yeah.
And I realized, oh my gosh, there's something out there called customer experience now. And that probably was 15 years ago. But it was really at the time a new and emerging thing, and hadn't really filtered at all into the professional services area. So it was something that I started to study and get to know pretty closely, and realized at that point, when I was looking as a chief marketing and sales officer, I was looking at how do we drive the brand from the inside out, by how do we create great experiences that really formulate what that brand is, versus just going out and telling people we provide a great experience and good service and good quality work.
Yeah, I love it. And I think it's great that this is finally entering. It seems so obvious, like why didn't this enter sooner? It just didn't. Right. But I do think, and it's such a core part of a brand. We do a ton of brand strategy work, and a lot of what firms come up with think it's just about identity, and it's so much deeper than that. And the firms that are working on client experience like yours and others in the marketplace are really ensuring that they're living their brand as part of this. And that's one of the things that I love about this, is that it's like, to me, true strategic alignment.
Absolutely. The brand is the behavior of the entire workforce. And the, the sooner we all recognize that and connect to that, the more effectively firms will start focusing on saying we can control client experience and shape our brand for the future.
Absolutely. So, Mitch, just for the people that might not have Googled it yet, like how would you define client experience, especially for, an accounting firm, accounting and advisory firm?
Absolutely. There are lots of great descriptions out there that you can find on Google, but I like to describe it as this. It's the combination of every moment and every touch point that an organization has with its client. So that begins at that phase of here's the initial awareness that they have with you as they're collecting more data, maybe the selection process of them looking at evaluating whether to work with you, and then of course if they make that choice to do so, that onboarding process, and then the delivery cycle that we begin going through on an annual basis providing the services. For me, that's that journey of working with a client that makes up the client experience. We really start to measure that client experience in the heart of how our clients think and feel about us.
Mhm.
That's really what it comes down to, is that ultimate look at the experience that the client takes and that says, from the history of working with you or from any given moment and interchange and experience they have within that journey, how do I how does that make me feel about working with the organization, and what does that make me think?
Yeah. That's amazing, and I love the way that you talk about all of those moments, not just touch points. A lot of times we see stuff in the market, or at least I do, and we think of just where we're touching somebody, or where we think one narrow set of people are touching something. But experience is built on moments and feelings, and those are immeasurable to me.
It's so emotionally based that sometimes, for I think our profession, any type of B2B type of world as well, that thinking about the emotion of a connecting point with a customer may seem awkward or odd, but people make decisions based on their feelings about things, and then they think of reasons to support those feelings. Very few people are good at making simple, rational, objective decisions. So we've got to remember, client experience is powerful in that it helps shape emotional response to our people and our organization.
Yeah. So, I mentioned earlier, like, I mean, you've been here for a while, like, you've been leading the way and then charging the way along with a few other people in the profession to really make strides for your firm. And this is definitely becoming a conversation that we have a lot with our clients, and that's going on a lot in the profession. But talk to me a little bit about how this has changed, just client experience in general from what you're seeing, because I know you also work with other firms around this.
Yeah, I've worked with about a dozen firms around the country trying to understand this, and offered some help. My firm has been kind enough to say, hey, we want to help the entire profession be a little bit better at this.
Mhm.
And really, over the last, I'll say, 5 to 8 years, I've seen a real evolution of it, moving from thinking that it's good client service to understanding that it's really built on how we engineer the entire experience across that journey. It's using feedback and listening to our clients and our associates that work within the organization to understand what's working and what's not, and reconfiguring that to create better outcomes in any of those moments. To make that really simple, because that sounds almost kind of like, oh, that sounds like a big firm would do that. I think any size firm, in fact, a smaller firm probably is going to be more likely successful at a client experience improvement effort than a big firm, because it's hard to get the big ship to move and get a whole bunch of people doing some things differently. Whereas if you specifically look at client experience, you could say, hey, we want to focus on the onboarding experience. And our firm really wants to make that an exceptional experience at our organization. And they work specifically in a small way to do that. Or perhaps they want to be the firm that creates this impression with their clients that we're always there with the next idea. We always end every conversation or interaction with the new idea, so that we work as a small firm to train all of our associates, no matter in what interactions that they're having, how are we adding a little bit more value and demonstrating that we're thinking about what's next for the client. That's all very achievable and drives dramatic differences in a measurable way.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's interesting to me is that when we go through this process, and our firm itself has just recently started looking at again, because every time you go through a growth cycle, I feel like you have to really take a hard look
Mhm.
at what you're doing. And so, it's really small things can have an impact, right? And like tiny brainstorming ideas, like one small tweak to something can just like, for lack of a better term, be earth-shatteringly, helpful for the end user, the client, at the end of the day. which is just, that's the part that I just find fascinating and amazing too, that it doesn't have to be like super big things, right? And that's where I think there's some gray in this client experience. People think it's like this really big thing, and they're like, I don't know how to get my arms wrapped around this.
Yeah. And when I'm talking, in fact, last month, I've talked to two smaller firms under 50. And I, just spent an hour with the team saying we need to understand what this can mean. And I finally get it down to at the front end of this, a good client experience program may just be talking with your associates and some of your clients and finding out where there are one or two friction points that need to be removed.
Mhm.
Now, I say friction points because it's one of the best places to start. Let's not focus on adding and trying to add more value until we make sure some of the rubs, some of the difficult parts of working with the organization are fixed. Let's fix those first, make sure our systems support removing that friction. Guess what? The associates and the clients generally know what those friction points are. And when you fix those, not only does it make for a better client experience, it makes for a better associate experience.
Completely agree with you. I also find that just part of the value for the firm is adding clarity. I feel like, accounting firms, as they grow, they start out one way, and there's a bunch of different ways you do things, a bunch of different preferences, even simple processes like how we set up a client that can impact whether we have the contact information and can respond in a timely fashion or react in a timely fashion, isn't there. And so those really small things, I've heard time and time again how much clarity, right? Like, well, we have it, but it's not written down. So it's in somebody's head, which means that's not good. It's got to get out of somebody's head so somebody else can like understand what that is. And even that is like a tiny thing to like, let's just take what's out of our heads and put it on paper and let's look at what we're doing, right?
You are
I
spot
know
on.
what somebody else is doing completely.
Spot on, absolutely. And again, as firms get larger and you say 2 or 3 office firms, well, getting those consistent workflow steps for any given process or interaction with the clients agreed to in 3 separate offices, well, that just adds a lot more complexity to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said something earlier, and I want to come back to it, right? You said, it's great to involve your associates and your managers. They know where those friction points are, but like, who should be involved in this process?
Well, I am really into next generation in involvement in these types of programs. So we did a recent digital transformation project. So I went to the IT team and said, I don't think that we should make this about being operationally more efficient. I know technology can make us more efficient and we can get things done faster and better, but let's instead approach this from a client's perspective. And so we did journey mapping with our clients, looking at all those phases of awareness and selection and onboarding and delivery of service and that repeat cycle. We brought a group of clients together and we trained our associates to interview the clients and put the entire journey map information together. So not only were we extracting information from those associates who were heavily involved, but we were also having them listening in an intense way to the clients and capturing that information before we brought it all together and then brought the full group together to really analyze all of that data. And that has been a true gift for us in having both associate and client feedback into those digital processes and those interfaces that we have with clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. I mean, we found tons of value of including lots of different people into that process. And I'm always just amazed by the ideas that they bring to the table and the insight that they can provide in that process. But I love that you trained your people to talk to your clients about this. how powerful to get them to see the side of the client. I mean, that just changes perspective completely.
And I'm not talking about, senior level associate. I'm saying I brought in a manager level, and they knew the client. They were working on the account. We trained them. We gave them the tools and support to do it. We practiced. We role played it before they ever went out and worked with the clients. And then we had them conduct it. We had somebody there capturing all the notes and everything to support them, so that it was a natural conversation for them to have.
That's so awesome. So awesome. Well, we've got just a few minutes left, and I know we could probably talk all about this for hours, but we like to limit these out of respect for people's time. But if you had to think of like a couple takeaways, maybe like what are 2 or 3 things that firms can do today to elevate their client experience or to get started if this is something that they want to do?
A lot of people get confused that doing surveys and having a client satisfaction score, an NPS score, means they have a CX program. But I'd like to instead have people think about, let's have a listening program. And that may be made up of a survey. That may be made up of client interviews. That may be made up of focus groups. A number of different ways of talking with all of your clients to better understand what it's like to work with your organization. Is it good to get a satisfaction number and an ease of doing business and an NPS score? Yeah, it's great. And they're great comparisons. But what's most important is that you're listening to the client and you're really beginning to understand what makes you potentially different from your competitors. And maybe you'll pick up a few ideas on things you can improve. And when we identify some of those ideas to improve, we then can take those ideas and begin working to systematically re-engineer how we do things to create a better result for the client. Mm-hmm. So that'd be one thing. Listen, just start listening better. The next thing I would say would be look for the friction point. I talked about that before, but look for the friction points and pick one, fix it, execute on that, and measure your improvement. Okay? It doesn't have to be really complicated. Get a small group of employees together, figure out where those friction points are, talk to a handful of clients, gain their understanding and agreement of what needs to change, and then systematically outline good workflow of what a better outcome will be to work on removing those types of friction points. That'd be my second thing is actionable by anybody who's listening. Anybody, whatever size firm, everybody can do the first 2 things I've just mentioned. For larger firms, maybe they need to begin probably looking at the governance of what CX is intended to mean in their organization. And when I say governance, it's really looking at if they're going to develop a program for CX, where is it going to fit within the organization and what are the guidelines it will have to operate and influence all structures of the business becoming client-centric. And when I say that, I mean everything that we do and everything that touches the client needs the vision of client centricity and has an impact on that CX outcome.
Absolutely. Mitch, those are fantastic tips. And I want to thank you so much for coming and sharing just a little bit of your expertise around this area. So valuable for our listeners.
Absolutely. It was great to be here. Thank you.
All right. Thank you to our listeners. That's it for today.